Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host today. I'm also the creator and the moderator of TheChocolateLife.com. And I want to welcome everybody who's joined me today and to say, if you can, go into the comments wherever you are, whether you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, and give me a shout out. Let me know where in the world you're connecting from today, whether it's YouTube, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Facebook. I will see that. You don't have to tell me what platform you're connecting from, but where in the world for you. When you're in the United States, if you're overseas, please let me know. And what I'll do is I'll get that comment up on the screen. I'll get that shout out on the screen and shout out back to you. And now that that quick introduction is over, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk a little bit about today's topic. And today's topic is on healthy and what healthy means for all of us, but specifically what you need to be aware of about proposed changes in regulations about if you're going to make a claim that a product is healthy for you. And I'm in this particular case, I'm thinking about healthier for you chocolates or healthy baked goods, things made with chocolate, that you want to pay very, very close attention to some recent introductions, some news from the FDA here in the United States. Now, this applies whether you're in the United States making a product or whether you're overseas and want to sell a product making a health claim in the United States. So there might be some applicability for people who are using in other countries who are exporting into the United States. But before we begin this topic, I want to really, really quickly talk about something that I brought up on Tuesday's episode on alternative ingredients, and specifically this report, right, which has to do with the fact that erythritol, which is a very common alternative sweetener that is used in many, many chocolate products and other food products, and whether or not it may be linked to stroke and heart attack and cardiovascular disease in general. And after having a chance to look at the research and reaching out to a friend of the Chocolate Life, Keith Ayub, about this particular topic, and sort of coincidentally, he was also involved in research on this. What you find is that while there may be some correlation, there may be some correlation. If we actually take a look at the way the erythritol study was conducted, it turns out to be one of those, well, let's feed mice 1,000 times what they would normally consume in a day, right? Well, they didn't do that much, right? But let's feed an animal many, many times what they would normally be expected to eat in any given amount of time, and see what the effect is over the long term. And if you actually go and look at this study in more depth, it turns out that there are some aspects of the methodology which call into question how close the correlation might be, right? So for people who may not know this, erythritol is actually a sweetener which is found naturally occurring in some foods. It is not metabolized by the body, right? So the fact that you might have small amounts of it, around is not an indicator of much of anything. And the results, if you look very, very closely at the study, there are studies which have come out in more or less the same time period, which seem to indicate that the risks associated with erythritol are not as high as this report and this study will make them out to be. Now, does that mean we don't need to do some additional studies to find out if in fact there is a correlation? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not a doctor, and so I don't know how to deeply interpret the results from this study and how it would affect other research that might need to get done, or whether we might want to do some meta-analysis of lots of existing studies, if those existing studies do exist, right? But the short-term response should be, in case anybody is concerned about this news, is that the relationship between erythritol and so major cardiovascular events turns out to be very, 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 very loosely correlated, right? Among people who are already at risk, right? So if you have an underlying condition, you are a diabetic, you already have some sort of condition, there may be some increase in risk. But if you do not have, if you're not consuming this in massive quantities, you're not consuming like 50, 100 grams of erythritol a day, you're not consuming, and all at one time, right? If you're not engaged in what would seem to be, unusual patterns of, consumption, then the risk is extremely low. So it's not zero. We need to worry about hazard. Is it a hazard? Maybe. What are the risks associated with that hazard? They tend to be very, very low. And it's not something that we should obsess about. I mean, I particularly don't like erythritol as a sweetener because of something called the negative heat of solution, which means it makes things taste cooler. So it's great if you're doing something which is bright and minty, but if you're doing something which is a chocolate, you may not want it to have that brightness. And so that's the consideration that I would make on this as a sweetener. But in terms of negative health consequences from consuming erythritol in regular quantities over a long period of time, it appears that the risk may be extremely low. So just wanted to clear that up because it's one of the things that we need to consider when we talk about something that may or may not be healthy. All right. So having done that, I want to jump and point to the fact that if we take a look quickly, this is a post which is currently on TheChocolateLife.com. So for every single one of these live streams, I create a post, right, which, among other things, has links to resources that you can visit after the fact. So, for example, you'll scroll down, and there is a headline here which is called resources. And under that headline, what you'll do is you'll find I've actually linked to the actual text of the proposed ruling. All right, I'm going to go to that page and we'll talk about it a little later, but I don't want you to have to think about finding the URL or really reading closely. You can follow along knowing that after the live stream is over, you can go and see the actual text of this. So that's there. There are two other FDA documents we're going to take a look at today having to do with what it is that's going on. And we're also going to take a look at some reporting which is being done around the topic, which is really, really quite interesting as far as I'm concerned with this. And with that, before we jump into this, what I want to do is do a quick shout out to Rain, who's connecting today from California. Hey, Rain, thanks for letting me know that you are here and you're joined. So I'm going to back out here. So, all right, with that said, so I first became aware of this earlier this week, right, when I saw this post. So I subscribe as a member of the press to publications from the Specialty Food Association of America. And so the SFA has a regular newsletter, daily, I think, and this post was in that newsletter. And it says CPG, which stands for Consumer Packaged Goods Companies. So CPG companies are opposing the proposed rule about healthy. It's important to know that the FDA first started regulating the use of the word healthy in food in the early 1990s, 1994 specifically. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to make sure that if a manufacturer was going to apply a healthy claim, either to packaging or to marketing around a particular food product, that the healthy claim was backed up and actually met the FDA's and the U.S. Department of Agriculture's nutrition guidelines. So we have like the nutrition pyramid. We have that. They wanted to make sure that there wasn't too much sodium, there wasn't too much fat, there weren't the wrong kinds of fats, all these kinds of things. It needed to be nutrient dense, so it needed to have vitamins and minerals and fiber and things like that. So the FDA created a series of limits based on what we knew about nutrition from prior to 1994. And actually, it would have been several years prior to that, because there would have been a notice of proposed rulemaking, and they would have put the proposed rule up there, and then there would have been a period of comment so that anybody who wanted to respond to the proposed guidelines would be able to respond to the proposed new rules before the FDA actually adopted it. Right? So this is a multi-year process. But the 2004 guidelines around the word healthy have been there since 1994, 2000. So, and based upon what we knew about nutrition prior to 1994. And one of the things that's happened over the course of the last, since 1994, nearly 20 years, is that our idea about sugar and fat, that sugar is better for you than fat, has completely been upended. So in the late 1960s, there was a decision that fat was bad. We're going to demonize fat, that all forms of fat, especially trans fats, that the way to have a healthy diet is to reduce fat. And if you're going to do that, one of the ways to make food tasty is to add a lot of sugar, right? And somehow sugar was better for you than fat was at the time. And we've learned over the course of the last 50 years that, in fact, the opposite is true, right? So what we have here is the nutrition guidelines. These are a proposed rulemaking which came out last year, and it was closed. The comment period was closed in mid-February. But as a result of this, what has happened is that these big companies, and when you say consumer packaged goods companies, we're talking about companies like General Mills. We're talking about Coca-Cola. We're talking about Pepsi-Cola. Really, really, really big companies have come out and said they oppose the FDA's new rules for what healthy means. Now, there are a couple of really, really interesting comments about this. Now, excuse me, I just got a new monitor and it requires me to look in a different place from where I was. I'm getting my setup set. This is the first time I've used it during a live stream. And so again, I don't necessarily want you guys, everybody to have to look on this or to read it closely, but I do want to be able to, I do want to point it out. And again, you can go and read these because the links are on the Chocolate Life right now. So what has happened is, number one, the CPG companies are saying the changes mean that high sugar, low fat products that currently qualify, right, to be called healthy can no longer qualified to include the word healthy on a label, right? And so some manufacturers are up in arms saying that we have a right under the First Amendment. So it's a freedom of speech to be able to communicate about our products in a particular kind of way. And we were able to label our products healthy last month, but we're not going to be able to label them as healthy when these rules come into effect. And what that does is that infringes our First Amendment free speech rights, which is, I don't understand it. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I can't figure out exactly what that means. So again, this is General Mills. So Kellogg's, for people who may be outside the United States, are not familiar with one of the brands that General Mills is known for. So it says that the rule precludes many objectively healthy products, included those promoted by the dietary guidelines, from engaging. So they're talking about products engaging in what they call truthful, not misleading commercial expression. So I'm going to assume that what they mean, the quotation is wrong, is that the companies that produce objectively healthy products, right, are going to be prohibited from engaging in truthful, non-misleading commercial expression, right? And that the new guidelines are overly restrictive boundaries for what constitutes, healthy, and that overly restrictive boundaries violate First Amendment protection. So the Consumer Brands Association, which is a part of this, again, the Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and the Campbell Soup Company, right, say this is a problem, right? That we have a right, or we have previously had a right under the First Amendment to talk about these things at healthy, and you're taking away this right from us, right? They say that 90% of all food products on the market, right, would not qualify for the healthy label under the new requirements. Now, what's interesting is that right now, as I understand it, only about 5% of all CPG products, so only about 5% of all the products that you can go and buy in a grocery store, actually right now use the healthy moniker. So they have a label on them, or they're marketed as healthy, right? And so this 95% number seems to me a little bit suspect, because I don't know if they were referring to 95% of all products, right, would not be able to meet the definition for healthy, which is the current case, because only 5% of products are actually marketed as healthy, or whether they're saying that 95% of all the products that are currently labeled as healthy would be continued to be labeled as healthy. Right? So I'm reading this. Obviously, I'm interpreting this because I've done some additional research on this topic, but it's very, very interesting what it is that the big companies are having to say. They're not saying, the FDA in its nutritional guidelines were saying, we know more now, and what we thought we knew 30 years ago is no longer valid, so we need to change the definition of healthy. They're not protesting that. That's not what these companies are going out against. They're not saying, well, yeah, it makes sense that if our notion of what healthy is has changed, then we should change how we define healthy, right? On the packaging. What they're saying is, no, right, our free speech rights are inhibited, which for me is a strange argument. I don't know in a court of law, I mean, in judges these days and regulations, I have no idea, right? But interestingly, Kellogg's, again, General Mills, right, said that the FDA proposal will automatically disqualify entire categories of nutrient-dense foods, right? And this is their objection to this, right? Because it turns out that a lot of products in the General Mills umbrella are in fact automatically disqualified under the new rules. So let's go and take a look at what that might mean. So what I want to do before I do that is, again, excuse me for leaning in. I say as this is a new monitor setup for me, is that over at CBS News there is a larger discussion of this, right? And what I want to do is point out, if I can, a couple of highlighted things. So again, we're piecing together from public reporting, because I think this is the first lens that most people get, is they won't actually go to the FDA and read the documents. Most people won't ever do that. What they'll do is they'll read what either the trade press or the general press is reporting about it. So, right, what CBS News is saying is that the proposed changes would leave out high sugar, low fat products that currently are allowed to use the healthy label today. These include all basically fruit favored low fat yogurts and cereals like Raisin Bran, right? So these might be nutrient dense in the sense that they might have vitamins and minerals, they might have fiber, they might have other things, some things that are good for us. But the fact that there are large quantities of sugar would mean that they can no longer be considered, well, they can no longer be labeled as healthy. Interesting thing. So, all right, so this is the thing. So they go on to duplicate this. The rule automatically disqualifies entire categories of food, right? So the proposed rules, right, say that they preclude what they think of as objectively healthy products, right, including those which are in fact promoted by the current dietary guidelines in the health pyramid, or the diet pyramid, right? And these brands are General Mills. They've got Annie's, right, which is the packaged macaroni and cheese products. They may have other pasta products. Betty Crocker baking mixes, Cascadian Farms, Pillsbury, Yoplait. They make Chex, Cheerios, Cocoa Puffs, Choco Puffs, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, Raisin Nut Bran, Wheaties. All of those things would no longer be able to be labeled as part of this healthy diet. And obviously they're going crazy over the fact that we're not allowed to do this. I mean, Kind, the granola bar company, took issue with the proposed limits. It's right here. Let me blow this up a bit. So we're at Kind right here. Took issue with the proposal by saying that they created a barrier for fruit, vegetable, and protein food innovation that would lead to a greater use of artificial sweeteners in order to mimic the taste of sugar-sweetened food. So they're saying basically, we know that sugar is a product that we need in order to make our products tasty, right? And we don't want you to take sugar away as an ingredient. We don't want you to redefine what sugar has. Sugar is an ingredient, right? although there is a lot of work that's being done right now in diets to focus on sugar reduction in drinks and things like that. It was one of the things we talked about on Tuesday, having to do with alternative sugars, right? But what they're saying is the alternative, the criteria for the use of the word healthy should not be so restrictive that they allow only a very limited number of foods to qualify. Because this could lead consumers to conclude that other foods are unhealthy, right? So we have spent many, many years developing product that adhere to the current definition, or the pre-2023 definition of what healthy means. And we want to be allowed to continue to call those things healthy, even though our understanding of the role of sugar, for example, has changed completely over the course of the last couple of years. And so this is the fear that if they can't use, so for example, right, they talk about ConAgra, one of the largest producers of food in the United States, right, has got an entire brand called Healthy Choice, right? And it turns out that under the new guidelines, they're too high in sodium, right? And it turns out that the sodium is in the sauce that they put on top of these things, right? And that people wouldn't eat the frozen meals unless it had all the salt on them. Okay. I mean, which, yeah, that is true, right? But if what it is I'm consuming is an enormous amount of salt, perhaps more salt than is healthy for me, because if I have one healthy choice portion, does anybody have one healthy choice portion? They're healthy for you. So you might have 2 or 3, right? And it's just a portion of the salt that you're consuming each day. What are the long-term consequences of a high sodium diet related to things like hypertension, right? So this is, how are we balancing, short-term and long-term impact in terms of what is going on? And the other thing is, should companies that have benefited at this point over the course of decades from a set of rules, should they somehow be exempted from these rules going forward? I mean, it's going to be a very, very interesting political battle going forward. So before I jump into the next part of this, what I do want to say is say hello to Mark and Yuri from Denver, Colorado. Customers have been asking and commenting on the recent report. And this is one of the reasons why, when I brought it up on Tuesday, I think I said more research is going to be necessary. So I went out and did some of my own sort of meta research, asking somebody who's in the field what they thought, and came back and I wanted to let you know that this particular report has some methodological errors in it. And if we take a look at those methodological errors, what it says is, well, there may be a very loose correlation. There is no causative link that has been demonstrated in that report. And so we can go, okay, all right, we can step back and worry about it. All right. However, like many things, if you are already at risk for cardiovascular events like heart attack, right, and strokes, because you have an underlying condition like diabetes, right, you may want to think about, right, how much of this you consume, because erythritol as a sweetener, I am going to prefer over regular sugar, natural sugar, because I have this underlying condition. So that's the trade-off and the balance. Again, there may be a potential hazard associated with it. And what we need to do is we need to balance our notion of the risk associated with that hazard. So, right. So it appears that the actual risk associated with the hazard is low for most people, but you should be aware of how much erythritol you're consuming over the course of a given day. That's it, right? You just need to be aware of it. So you can say, if I'm eating the equivalent of 3 or 4 grams, that might be okay over the course of the day. But if I'm consuming 30 to 40 grams over the course of, 10 or 20 minutes, right? Like you might want to rethink your consumption habits. That's it. So Mark, I hope that makes sense. Rain, yes, salt is a preservative, but I would say that if you have a frozen food, you're not really interested in salt as a preservative, because freezing it is the preservative. I would contend that I might use salt as a processing aid. It may, for example, penetrate the cell walls of food and make them easier for some kind of cooking or processing or something else like that, right? But when it comes to frozen food, my personal understanding from the way recipes are constructed is that most of the use of salt in frozen food, right, is for flavor, not for preservation. So there. You made another comment. I'm not going to put it up on the screen. Because it talks about a company that I know that you're involved in, and I don't understand what that means. Maybe the big company you mentioned is an investor in your company, and I don't necessarily know that that's an appropriate topic, but I'm interested in having you clarify that comment. It will be shown on the comment stream, right, wherever you happen to be watching. So if you're on LinkedIn, it will be the comment will be on LinkedIn, and it will also be in the live chat replay comments on YouTube. So just a quick note. That's why I want the clarification, even if I don't want to spend an enormous amount of time live on it. So what I want to do is I actually want to go and talk now about, right, the actual FDA documents which have been published on this. And again, there are links to these documents. If they're not there now, they will be shortly after the live stream. So this is the first one. So the FDA proposes to update its definition for the healthy claim in food labels. And notice that there is a publication date of this, let's get in here, of November of 2022. So at this point, what is new about this is the FDA is extending the comment period for the proposed rulemaking, right, for a little while. So the new deadline was the middle of February 2023, and the original posting of this was in September of 2022. So what we've got here, if you want to read through, what we say is, okay, September 28th, 2022, the FDA has issued a proposed rule, right? And there's a link there, so we're going to follow that link shortly, to update the definition of a nutrient content claim around the word healthy. What does healthy mean, right? And so we go through and they explain the reasons why. So diet-related chronic diseases in the US are the leading causes of death and disability. Not just a leading cause, but diet-related chronic diseases are the leading cause, right? So healthy eating patterns, which include, we're up here. Let me highlight this so you can follow along. So healthy eating patterns, which include fruit, veg, lower fat dairy, whole grains, right, are associated with improved health, such as risks from cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and certain types of cancers, right, as well as all of the consequences of being overweight or obese, right? So providing information and acceptable food labeling empowers consumers, that's the whole idea, and may help foster a healthier food supply, right, for all if some manufacturers include more fruit, veg, dairy, and whole grains and limit saturated fat, sodium, and added sugars in their products. So that makes sense. This is why the FDA, in its role of guiding the public health and welfare, is trying to do. So what they're saying is that the proposed changes, right, are aligned with the current nutrition science, right? There was a new set of dietary guidelines published and are cover the period 2020 to 2025, and this updated, which updated the nutrition facts label. And this particular change of rulemaking is designed to bring the word healthy into compliance with the new dietary guidelines. I think what's really, really interesting about this, is in this paragraph, and I was just sort of stunned when I read it for the first time. So as an example, to include healthy claim on a package, a cereal would need to contain a certain amount of whole grains, right? I assume that's for products that have grain in them to begin with, and adhere to limits for saturated fat, sodium, and added sugars. What's interesting is that nuts and seeds, higher fat fish such as salmon, and certain oils, and water are examples of food that cannot currently be labeled as healthy, which is really interesting. Now, I think that's one of the reasons why 90% of all the foods that you go into a supermarket and can buy are not labeled healthy, right? Because it might be fresh fish, which are high in fat, and so it's a high fat content. You might have an olive oil, which is, obviously 100% fat, but it's a kind of fat that is good for, we've determined is good for overall dietary health. So there are whole bunches of foods right now that can't be labeled as healthy. Number one, they don't have any fiber in them, for example, right? So the goal of this, all right, is to change these things, change the definition based upon what our new understanding is. And then what they want to do is they want to create a symbol, sort of like the Rainforest Alliance frog or the USDA symbol around organic, that would let people know that something can be considered healthy under the new regulations. So what I want to do now is go from here. Remember, we said there was a proposed rule. And here is the proposed rule. So I can't actually do a bookmark card. So if I go to the post on the Chocolate Life, what you'll notice is that this link is not a bookmark card. And the reason why is that the website won't let me do it. So I had to insert it as a hand entered link. But so this here, the Federal Register food labeling, is this page here. Right? So if you've never read one of these things, there is an art to reading these things. This is not necessarily something which is simple to get into, right? But it's really helpful to understand how the live version of these documents on the Federal Register are organized and presented. There is a PDF version of it, but the lack of interactivity in the PDF version, I think, makes it a challenge, which is why I'm not working from the PDF version. I'm providing the live link on the Chocolate Life. So what I can do is I can scroll down here, and we've already, I think, covered the summary of this. The FDA is saying our idea of what healthy is has changed over the last 30 years, since the 1990s, when we introduced these guidelines to begin with. And we've talked about effective dates, and we've talked about how people can comment. And by the way, there is a link over here. So you can see, so enhanced content is you can go and read all of the public comments if you want to, right? Which is very, very cool. So you can read what General Mills is saying. You can read what the people at Coca-Cola are saying. You can read what the Kind Bar people are actually saying, not what the press is reporting them to have said. So this is one of the reasons why I like the live document. You can go into that, and they're fascinating. So the first, and then they come into a table of contents. So we've been through the executive summary, a summary of the major provisions, the legal authority, cost and benefits, the introduction. So there's some really, really interesting stuff in here that you can go through and read. So the purpose of the proposed rule, let's scroll down here, B, is to say that we as consumers rely on labels to help us make purchasing decisions. And it is in the best interest of consumers, right, to have accurate information, so complete information and accurate information on the labels in a way that is relatively easy to be able to understand. Keeping in mind that most people don't actually read the back of the label and understand what the full list of ingredients is. Full list of ingredients is, right. I want to make sure that is R. They don't understand that, and they're not likely to. So they're relying on keywords on the front of a package: gluten-free, non-GMO, fair trade, healthy. It could even be a part of the name of the brand, or the name of the brand, as in Healthy Choice from ConAgra. It could be a part of marketing on television, right? This healthy, this bowl of cereal with toast and orange juice, right, is part of this healthy breakfast, right? So we want to know what healthy meant, right? And so one of the things that has happened over the course of the last 30 years is that the FDA has produced a new set of dietary guidelines. And so I am going to link to this page. It's not there yet, but I'm going to link to this page. And what you can do is you can click on this download PDF link, and it will launch a browser. And I'm going to embed the link rather than the PDF, right? And you can find out what the new dietary guidelines are if you want to know. I mean, the average person is not going to go and read through what the dietary guidelines are, right? But, right, what's important to know is that these new dietary guidelines are the basis for why the definition of healthy is being changed. So what should you do? you should follow a healthy dietary pattern at every life stage. Well, that makes sense, right? Customize and enjoy nutrient-dense and beverage choices to reflect your personal preferences. That means, so consume what you find tasty, consume what you like. It may be based on personal preferences. It may be based on your food background, the culture that you grew up in, and it's definitely going to be related to how much money that you have to spend, right? You want to focus on meeting food group needs with nutrient-dense foods and beverages and stay within calorie limits. So you don't want to consume a lot of empty calories. So a lot of sugar with nothing else in it in the way of vitamins and minerals, fibers, and other kinds of things like that. That makes an enormous amount of sense, right? Our understanding of the role of sugar in diseases like diabetes, our understanding of the role of salt in hypertension. These things have become much better known over the course of the last 30 years, and understanding how certain oils, avocado oil, olive oil, the fat in cocoa butter, right? Or cocoa butter as a fat, right? And whether or not it is, even though technically a saturated fat, because it's solid at room temperature, right? Because of the triglyceride structure of cocoa butter, it's actually not lumped in, but it's actually considered to be a healthy fat along with good olive oil. So there's a lot of, so this gives you an understanding of what the FDA is trying to do. And it says, limit foods and beverage that are higher in added sugar, right? Higher in saturated, especially trans fats, higher in sodium, and limit alcohol. All of these things, I believe we could all agree with. But the question is, what does that do in terms of their impact on a label, right? And this is where we can go into the federal, this is in the Federal Register, and they will be talking in depth. So this is the proposed rule. You can go here and you can find out exactly what it is the FDA is proposing. And again, summary of the major provisions, right? So we're going to say some things here. Under the existing regulations, there are specific criteria that must be met, right? And the criteria have to do with, there are limits on total fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, sodium, and the minimum amounts of nutrients whose consumption is encouraged, such as vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, iron, protein, and dietary fiber, right? And so we're looking, the proposed revisions in the rulemaking are around this concept. Furthermore, it says a number of foods that are emphasized in current nutrition science and federal dietary guidelines as elements of a healthy dietary pattern are not able to bear the healthy claim under the current regulation, right? So for example, salmon is a high-fat fish, and yet fish oil is something that we have learned is incredibly beneficial. It's to the point where a high-fat fish like salmon or sardines or mackerel or something like that is at least one serving a week is recommended by the government. But ironically, because of the fat content under the old regulations, you could not actually put the word healthy on the label. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is the regulations are trying to do is they're trying to update our understanding of the change in our understanding of the of what in fact is good for us in a diet and what in fact is not good for us in a diet. And so I encourage everyone who's reading this to give it a quick look, even if you only get through the introductory sections. So we'll scroll up here, even if you only get to the introductory sections. So what the purpose is, what the summary is, you can take a look at what the costs and benefits are. And so, this is interesting. What they're saying is that right now, because diet-related disease is incredibly costly to society, by changing the use of the word healthy, what we can do is we can reduce the overall societal burden. So this is lost work days. This is people spending time in hospital. This is the requirement to be on medications for life. This is, this is obviating the needs of certain kinds of surgery. There are lots of costs, right? That what these regulations are designed to do is they're designed to find a way to make sure that as a society they are not incurred. So and risk to some extent increases as I grow older. And so, what is the long-term cost of Medicare and Medicaid, and what does this do to the cost of health insurance, and what does this do to the cost of medication? Eli Lilly just voluntarily capped the limit for the cost of insulin, out-of-pocket cost of insulin, to $35 a month. Very important, because if you don't have insurance or you're not covered by Medicare or Medicaid, what does that mean? Don't understand exactly. But it's important to understand these nuances. So here's where we want to go and understand we've got the purpose of the proposed rule. We got a discussion of the costs and benefits. You've got an introduction to why the rule is being done. So this is a longer form discussion that comes out of the executive summary. And they give you a whole glossary of what acronyms are, really, really important, a history of the regulatory environment, why they think it's important to update the word healthy, right? Really, really, this is a lot of words, I understand, but it will. So if you are making a chocolate product, if you are selling a baked good that has chocolate in it, if you are selling products into this market, right? And for example, you want to make a healthier for you version of your product, right? So if you want to say, okay, I need to make sure that I'm producing a product which doesn't have this much sodium in it, or has the right kind of fat in it, or has got vitamins and minerals in it, or has fiber in it. So what it says is, if I wanted to make a healthy claim in a chocolate bar, what I might want to do is add inclusions into the chocolate bar. So the chocolate itself might not qualify for healthy, even though cocoa butter is a good fat, but the inclusions in the chocolate bar, right, are fit in the range of things that could be considered healthy. And so a fruit might increase the sweetness, so I could use chocolate, which has a lower amount of sugar in the chocolate, from the sweetness in the fruit. I've got vitamins and minerals associated with fruit and nuts, right? I can add, I might add some turmeric in a bar. I can add spices. So there are lots of things that I can do, right, to be able to create a healthy bar, or a healthier for you chocolate bar, which are not just, can I replace sugar with an alternative sweetener, right? And for me, this is what I want to know. How do I create a healthier for you product? I can still use sugar because people like the taste of sugar, right? They like the way it makes you feel. It's incredibly addictive. Our bodies over the course of the last 50 years, because of the fact that sugar is in almost everything, right? Yeah, go to the grocery store and pick up a bunch of items that you say there's no reason for there to be sugar in this product, and there's a lot of sugar in many, many things that you would not understand. So it's interesting to understand exactly what it is they're trying to do and how it might affect your thinking as a chocolate maker, right, about the way you approach recipe development for new products. Right? There are lots of ways to create a healthier for you chocolate product, which don't necessarily mean you're reducing the amount of sugar in your product. Now, that could be one thing. Or yes, reducing the sugar is certainly one thing to do, but not necessarily replacing, right, the sugar with erythritol, with xylitol, with some other, monk fruit, which I'm not a big fan of. Technology has gotten so much better. 10 years ago, if you had stevia in something, you could taste the bitterness from a long way away. Right? And so really, really cool in terms of understanding. And this is why I think it's important to do this deep dive. Understand, if you can, what we knew about these dietary guidelines in the past. What was their thinking? What drove them? Why are we here? What was our definition of healthy back then? And how has our definition of healthy changed? Why is that important? Right? Because if you understand the thinking behind the change in regulations, this gives you an opportunity to speak to your customer, right, about the change. Now, I'm going to assume you're not ConAgra, you're not Kellogg's, you're not Coca-Cola, you're not one of these big companies that have built entire empires based on deconstructing ingredients and then reconstructing them in a way. So we're going to take the fat out, we're going to replace it with another kind of fat. We're going to take that out, but in order to make it tasty, we're going to increase the amount of sugar. Well, that mindset in the lab This is not something that small chocolate makers or small bakers or small confectioners ever have to worry about, right? Because you're not doing that process. You're not deconstructing everything in order to put something back together. But the goal is to understand what the changes are. Okay, there are now a whole range of fats that we think of as healthy, whereas 30 years ago, it was total amount of fat, and it really didn't matter what kind of fat it was. Yes, there's this aversion for trans fats for obvious reasons, right? But we're going to go and do basically preferentially want carbohydrates, and a lot of it from sugars as opposed to fats. These are the sorts of things you can take a look at your products and say, oh, I can make them better by doing X and Y and Z. And by understanding the reasons for the changes in regulations, it makes you a better communicator to your customers about why you have decided to introduce the products that you're introducing. And so you can come down here and you've got the entire history. So you've got the Federal Register, Chapter 58, 2302. This is nutrient content claims in generaling. You've got this whole thing about food labeling, serving sizes of foods that could be reasonably consumed at one occasion. I mean, this is interesting. So if you're a chocolate maker, what is the maximum serving size you might want to put on something? That would be cool. I would like to know that. There's a lot of hidden gems in here if you read it closely, right? And it's a serving size for breath mints. That's cool. Who knew there was a maximum serving size for breath mints? It's important, right, for a variety of reasons, right? But what are those reasons? You can now find out, right? And here we have a 2016 ruling on the guidance of the use of the term healthy, right? So you can go to the history of this and all sorts of other things. It says that we're the FDA, and under federal law, we have the right to be able to enact these regulations. And now they're telling you what they're going to do. So they're saying that based upon these new dietary guidelines, what we're doing is we're updating the use of the word healthy. Yay, right? They're going to tell you how they went about determining what healthy was, right? Okay, and so that's really, really important. They're going to talk about what food groups are, right? If you don't know specifically what food groups are, this is where you can go to school, right? So rather than having to pay a lot of money for a food science class or something like that, what do food groups mean in the context of being a food manufacturer? Yep. All that other kind of stuff, right? So it explains what a healthy diet is, right? And so if you're talking about how your chocolate product is a part of a healthy diet, right, you can talk about, oh, here's what the FDA considers under the new dietary guidelines to be a healthy diet. And, don't rely on ChatGPT to do this, is what I say, right? Go through, do the research yourself. Maybe you could use this as input for some sort of program pointed at this page and go use this to write some text for me, but don't rely on ChatGPT to get this level of detailed or any other kind of AI, which is going to write stuff for you, to get this right for you, because it's important that you actually understand it, so that if you do use an AI to write this for you, you can go, well, this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and you can understand what it is, the nuance that they're missing. I mean, I like these new writing tools, but I don't use the output of them. What I do is I use them as sounding boards, and I'll use them as jumping off points for things, but I don't use them as they are written. So really, really important. So they talk about how many servings per day, what size of servings. They talk about what nutrients you have to limit. So what do you want to stay away from? And number one, in this particular case, what they're focusing on is, so they talk about what nutrient-dense foods mean, right? So you can talk about that. And there's this list here about things that you want to avoid. Added sugar, saturated fats, lots of salt, right? So, all right. So when you're putting together your recipes, you want to be aware of these things, right? If you want to be able to put the word healthy on a label, or make a healthy claim in your advertising, or healthier for you claim in your advertising. And I'm not going to go over any more of this right now, right? But I just wanted to point out, this is where you would go to find the information. Don't rely on CBS News to get this right for you. Do not rely on a press release from Kellogg's to get this right for you. Do not let a press release from ConAgra, right, saying, this violates our First Amendment speech rights, right? This is not, that's for a court to decide, right? But you need to remember a couple of things. Number one is, chances are that the person at CBS News is a general purpose reporter and may not have deep expertise in terms of understanding the topic matter. And so one of the things that I would say is, if I do go to CBS News here, right, one of the things that I would look at, again, how do I go about determining how much of this I should pay attention to, right? And I would go take a look at who is quoted. So if the only companies that are name checked and quoted in here are companies, in this particular case, it's Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Hain Celestial, Campbell Soup, General Mills, Kind, right? If these are the only companies that are mentioned, and there is no nutritionist, right, or epidemiologist, or nobody who is name checked as a source for information, right? What you're doing is you're getting only a part of the question, the part of the story, and you're getting the part of the story that to some extent benefits the manufacturers whose names are mentioned. What they're trying to do is they're trying to say, this is bad, it's going to destroy us as companies. We're not going to be able, we're going to have to change our food, and if we change our food, people may not like it anymore, right? Okay, right? That's the narrative that CBS News, ConAgra cannot continue to invest in healthy innovation. It's a straight out threat, right? If the FDA agrees to these rules, ConAgra can't invest in innovation, right? We're going to be put at a competitive disadvantage. It's like, you've got to be very careful when you read these things to take a look at what it is that they're saying, and to take a look, is anybody here name checked, right? And the answer is, the only entities that are name checked are in fact the companies who will be directly affected by this change. And so I would take everything in that article, right, with a grain of salt, right, pun intended, right, a small grain of salt, not too much salt. You don't want to consume too much sodium, right? But I would go take a look, right, at if there are any links. So it's interesting. So this article from the Specialty Food Association actually is the one that told me about and linked to this article on CBS News. That's how I found this, right? And in looking around, I found this. So here's again, this is not on the Chocolate Life at the moment. I'll put this link there, but it is what the FDA is saying about its consumer marketing campaign. So this is what the FDA wants to communicate to consumers. Here we have a much more in-depth discussion of what the proposed update is. We have something which is, again, a little bit more general, but if you want to use the word healthy in labeling and marketing, this is where you're going to go. All right. So really important to understand, here's little graphics like this. So dietary intake and recommendation. So 63% of food on the market, or 63% of people, exceed the limit on a daily basis for consuming added sugars, right? So this becomes something that you might put into your marketing. So we're reducing added sugar, right? You might do that from an alternative sweetener. You might do it from inclusions, which reduce the overall quantity of sugar that's in a serving. You get the idea. But now what you do is you have statistics that you can use, right? So here are some things that in the past, do you believe that you could not use the word healthy on eggs, right? You could not use the word healthy on olive oil. You could not use the word healthy on salmon, right? You could not use the word healthy on full fat yogurt. I mean, it's like, I understand it, I think, under the old guidelines, but under the, but it just makes me wonder about what we're doing about, it's like we talked about how nuts and fruit, dried fruit, although dried fruit is sugar bombs, what that will mean in terms of, how we need to think about sugar. But for example, if you get a chance between, dried cranberries, many dried cranberries are actually sprayed with sugar syrup to sweeten them. So you actually have to look at the back and say, oh, is sugar an ingredient, and what are the added sugars and how does it get there? So I can do raisins, which are naturally high in sugar, but I can take those naturally high in sugar raisins and make them sweeter, right? This is what we want to be able to teach people to do, is to be better about consuming. That give you, here are the guidelines for what you want to be able to consume. Yay! I mean, it's like all you need to know is in this. So adding nuts into a chocolate product, right, could be good, right? Oh man, if you could find vanilla or yogurt powder, I can tell you yogurt powder as an ingredient, it could increase the protein content of what you're doing. And it's also got this nice tang. So if you're think of, yogurt covered raisins, which are usually not yogurt, they're yogurt-ish, some sort of flavoring, but you could use a full fat yogurt powder in a chocolate bar, maybe white chocolate, probably better, but add nuts and fruit to it, and you've got something which would be, right, a good snack as far as this is concerned. I mean, you get the idea, right? That these provide the guidelines where you need to take a look and understand. And so all these links, again, are going to be available to you on The Chocolate Life after this. I also want to point out before we go, because we're at the end of the hour. So Rain, I want to thank you, right? So yes, you deal with a lot when trying to extend shelf life. And I agree, understand, for example, one way to extend the shelf life of a chocolate bar is to add anhydrous milk fat or butter oil, right? How does adding butter fat to a chocolate extend the shelf life? Well, what it does is it changes the way the cocoa butter crystallizes over time. And what it does is it slows down that crystallization process, right? And it reduces the likelihood of the chocolate blooming. So I can use anhydrous milk fat, ghee, cocoa butter, whatever, or butter fat, whatever you want to call it, in a chocolate recipe, right? To be able to act as a preservative, right? To extend shelf life. We don't usually think of butter as a preservative, right? But that's because of the water component. Remove the water and it changes everything together. So depending on what you want to do, yes, you do deal a lot when trying to extend shelf life. The point that I was trying to make here is that when it comes to frozen foods, the idea of using salt as a preservative, which is part of your point, becomes far less necessary. I may want to use, I could use sorbitol as a sweetener because it not only has an effect on water activity, but it's also a sweetener. Then there are reasons why I might use these things as a way to extend the shelf life of frozen food. But at that point, the ingredient might be multifunctional, right? And so, yeah, no, I totally understand it. So how you would go about approaching this is going to depend on what you're trying to preserve and where you're actually selling it, right? From a chocolate bar perspective, for example, if I'm throwing nuts, right, raw nuts especially, on the back of a bar without covering it with chocolate, I can tell you that I've had chocolate bars which were relatively fresh, like 3 months from the date of being deposited, in which mold and mildew had managed to grow around the raw nuts, raw cashews in this particular case. And so you open up the back of the bar and there's mold and mildew. It's not the chocolate, right? It's the nuts. And so what are you going to do to make sure that the nuts are clean? Interesting question, right? But preserving chocolate and preserving nuts, you use very different approaches on what it is you attempt to do, right? So absolutely, you deal with a lot when you're trying to extend shelf life. You're dealing with a lot when you try to mitigate your use of chemicals, and also to select produce or ingredients that may not have been that may have been subjected to pesticides and fungicides and other kinds of things. And it's during its growth and manufacturing. So there's a very, very long comment here about so Rain is associated with a company based in California, I believe, called Urban Remedy. And Urban Remedy is involved in working to reimagine the food system, refining what healthy means. Okay, so Rain, you cannot refine what healthy means. The FDA is going to tell you what healthy is, and then you have to reimagine your ingredients list and your production to meet the list of healthy. If what it is you want to do is you want to use healthy as a claim in your product and your advertising, right? So refining what healthy means. So you now have to do that refining of your marketing message, in my opinion, right? Within the context of what the new rules are, right? So helping fight alongside the major companies that you mentioned. Yeah. Sustainability through health and business cannot be defined by the improvement. I don't disagree with you, right? What I'm saying, and I'm saying to everyone here, is there's a new set of rules, right? You need to be aware of what those rules are if what it is you want to do is you want to produce products that are healthier for you, right? And you don't want to be in a position, and I don't think a small chocolate maker is going to be, nobody's going to go and say, this is not a healthy product, right? Number one is you probably don't have enough income to make it worthwhile suing you, right? These are things that really, really big companies are much more concerned with, because when it comes to thinking about how they need to change their recipes to accommodate the new guidelines or to meet the new guidelines, that they are huge changes in the way that they've been doing things. And that's why they're fighting back so hard. And I just think it's really interesting that they're saying our ability to call something healthy is being infringed. Our First Amendment speech rights are being infringed. That's a really, really interesting legal argument. Not one that I would have thought of to begin with. And again, I have no idea what lawyers are going to say on that. I may actually go reach out to a lawyer. If somebody's got a lawyer that they can reach out to, I would be interested in knowing what the answer to that question is. But what I want to do is, we're past the hour, and there's a lot more rain in terms of what it is that you wrote in your comment that, we could go on for the next 35 minutes or 40 minutes or longer. And I want to respect everybody's time. It's Friday. It's 1:00 in the afternoon here in New York. Even though it's not the summer, it's still a Friday. And it's the end of the week, and people want to close out their weeks. I want to thank everybody who's made it through to the end of the hour here. It's been fascinating for me. This particular conversation took me places I didn't quite expect, which is one of the things. I have a rough idea of a script. No, I have a rough idea of an outline. I don't have a script at the beginning of each hour. And I'm really, really happy about where this went today. If you give me half an hour or so, what I will do is I'll take the links that aren't currently on this post in The Chocolate Life. I will put those links in this post on The Chocolate Life so you can go and follow up yourself on what all these things mean. I'm going to, remind everybody that today's sponsor is TheChocolateLife.com. If you would like to support the work that I do here, I don't have a Patreon. Right? I don't have advertisements on YouTube. I never plan to advertisements on YouTube. But if you get a chance, put a like on this particular video, a thumbs up if you're not currently a member of the Chocolate Wire channel on YouTube. Go to the Chocolate Wire, become a member. You can hit the bell and you'll be notified every week or twice a week when these live streams go up. If you're on YouTube, do that. If you're on LinkedIn or Facebook, go like and connect with me. Whether it's Facebook, you can like me, follow me, and you're on LinkedIn, connect with me, and I'd be happy to connect back to grow the community. And of course, if you do have the resources, go over to The Chocolate Life, click on the join button. If there's a free membership, there's been a free membership level since 2008 when The Chocolate Life started. If you find these things helpful and useful to your business and you'd like to support what it is that I'm doing financially, I won't say no, and I will appreciate every little bit of support that everybody gives at every level, right? And with that, hopefully my move looking away wasn't too distracting to everybody this week. I may need to find a little stand that puts the monitor more up front. I hadn't really thought about that in the context. My old monitor was on a stand, and anyway, I'm figuring it out. But with that, I want to say to everyone, thanks for being here today. I want to wish everybody a great weekend coming up. I want to let everyone know that on Tuesday, I am going to have a chocolate bar manufacturer located in Pittsburgh, who is using one of the alternative milks that we talked about last Tuesday. And I'm going to be with the founder of the company, the chief chocolate maker of the company. They've sent me sample bars, and I'm going to be able to taste them. And I won't taste them before Tuesday. So you'll get my live reaction of those on Tuesday, which should be fun. So that's Tuesday, beginning at 12 o'clock Eastern time. We're going to be having that discussion about a chocolate bar made with an alternative milk, which it's a new kind of alternative milk. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to have that discussion. But until then, I want to remind everybody, as I try to end every single one of these episodes of the Chocolate Life Live, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.